So I'm going to jump right in. So I want to know, as actors, what is your relationship to empathy?
Thinking about empathy, I feel like it's one of our, there's a sense of responsibility and duty towards this. It feels like a muscle that I get to train alongside of my voice and my body and my imagination. And yeah, I feel like it's one of the most core elements of responsibilities that we need to take on and that we need to own up to as actors, personally, yeah.
Not only that, I think it's not only a muscle to be trained as an actor, but it's part of many actors' inherent like personality traits to be more open and empathetic, because in any form of story or narrative that's to be told, it's mostly focused around characters, and those are based on like individual people in specific circumstances having problems or feeling joy. And as an actor, you have to naturally be a little more open to receiving those feelings in various intensities. So it's not only a muscle to be trained and developed, but it's also a personality trait to be empathetic, and it's a quality that I think a lot of actors just have naturally.
Yeah, I agree that empathy is something that is cultivated, that like each human comes here with like the seed of that, but there are some of us, like us actors, that, like you guys both said, that we get to train that element. And I'm very interested in like the brain and how it works, and it's been shown that empathy can be registered in the brain, like certain parts of the mind are fired up, and it's the ability to see the other person as yourself and then to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And not everyone can do that so easily. So it's great to be able to cultivate that and practice that and, you know, grow that part of the mind, you know.
Yeah, Soma, what you just said about being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, I think like for me, when people used to ask me as a kid, like, how do you know you want to be an actor? What, like, how do you know? It's like the fact that this is the only profession in the world where you literally get to see through somebody else's eyes. Like there is no other job in which you are to put yourself aside and embody somebody else. Like I just feel like the whole entire concept of acting revolves around empathy. And I had an acting teacher who used to say, you're in the business of empathy. And to always remember that like your love for the expression of human emotion is the reason that you should be in the room. And I think that's like something that grounds me every single time I look at a script, every single time I look at a movie, a theater piece. It's like you can just feel when that actor is there for the love of humanity and for the love of emotion. And I think that that's so important.
Definitely. So I consider myself an empath. And I love what like everyone said about like the theater and character work and the fact that we can cultivate empathy. But because I am an empath, I find that maybe some characters require more work than others. You know, it's very easy for me to be empathetic when I pick up an August Wilson play, or I pick up a character that I can relate to their circumstance. But in training, when I pick up Strindberg, and I pick up something totally outside of my culture, I believe that that's when the cultivation comes in, because I have to ask myself, okay, if I lived here, how would I feel? And then I have to go in with the research. So then I can cultivate empathy that may not have been natural if I were playing someone else.
Right. So you mentioned research there, and that you're kind of going the extra mile to understand this person that you're going to, you know, embody and emote from. on the flip side, what are the responsibilities and the dangers that this empathy bears when you have to hold that?
One thing that came up in my training a lot was the whole concept of like never being allowed to judge your character. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of my classmates and I really struggled with that, because sometimes you have to play an abuser, sometimes you have to play somebody who is causing harm in like a very explicit way, and there's question around like, how is it, where are my morals if I'm not going to condemn this behavior, or if I'm not going to look at this behavior as a problem. And I think like the balance of staying true to the character and being on your character's side, and then also having your own moral compass, is just like a constant struggle for me, at least.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a balancing act, you know, because when you get the opportunity to portray and really get to dive deep into a character who in the script has very problematic behaviors and ideologies, you have to remember that like this body and this containment is always present on stage and when dealing with the story and the characters, and you both have to be true. And then this is where it gets a little bit meta for me, because it's like, how do I ever put myself aside to, is that necessary in the process of really being empathetic towards my character? And it gets even more complicated when, for example, the actor themselves is, for example, a victim of abuse, and you have to portray, and then it hits too close to home, you know. But at the same time, it's your job, so you have to go there. And I constantly have to remind myself when I'm in situations like that, that does not mean Aileen, the actor, has to forgive whoever abused me in my past. And that's why, like I say in the beginning, I said that it feels like a muscle, because once you enter different territories and the situation gets a bit more complicated, you really have to sit down and tease out what it is that you have to do to really, you know, become one with the character. And when you are one, is there also like there has to remain distance, because you have to keep yourself safe, or else how are you going to do job after job after job, you know?
Right. I love distance there, and I actually want to ask about that. How do you, you know, give yourself over to a process but still stay soulful to yourself? And then kind of a two-part question, when you're finished with that role, what is the process of grieving that character? How do you let that person go?
I can speak to the first half of that question. For me, there are moments when I judge a character, because as humans, we judge whether or not, you know, we intend to. But I think what I've cultivated is never to blame the character, because even the worst character has their own life story and conditions and contextual things that got them to that point. And if we're judging it as bad or good, that's understandable, to allow that self-protection, but to then blame the character, I think is a different layer that I try to just stay away from altogether, because once you add blame in there and you're like, this character is this way because of this, without understanding everything that led up to that point, then you kind of don't allow yourself to experience that empathy. And also, when you step into that character, you know, what we're talking about right now is very heady, but the matter of the fact is, you do all the research, and then what they say is you put the research down. So in that moment, there is a letting go of yourself to become this person. Like, I truly believe that. And it's a letting go, knowing that you're going to return to yourself afterwards. But in the moment, you are completely, I think the best actors do completely let go of at least that part that is judgmental or blameful, at the very least in that moment.
In a sense, it's not really about, justifying the actions of the character, but like understanding at the core, like how they're feeling and what circumstances that brought them to behave in this way. And the thing that you can do as an actor to lose yourself in that is to, like, while you're training or while you're prepping for this role, on your own, like just by yourself in isolation, engage in like the behaviorisms and like the bodily, sort of containment of this character. But then as a practice that I learned in my training is that immediately set a ritual for yourself to let it go. Because the worst thing that happens, and that's a responsibility that an actor has to themselves, is to release the tension that you hold in your body by being this character for a prolonged period of time. Else it causes, a lot of mental and emotional strain that isn't necessary, and it's not sustainable for your practice.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie, can you the ritual you spoke about when you're grieving your character, what is that ritual that you take part in?
A lot of times, my training was particularly Strasberg's method. So a lot of it was sitting and like completely letting go of all the tension in your body that involves like a chair, just exalting like all of this energy that you've held while you were this character, and then giving yourself 5 minutes to remember your breathing. Remember, this is the feeling of like my arm making this motion, coming back into yourself and in the most like acutely physical awareness. And eventually, that tingling feeling that you have in your hands after being so enraged for like a 10-minute scene, like fizzles out, and you feel the sensation kind of dissipate because, you're not them. You're yourself. You're here in this room. How many chairs are in the room right now? Count them. Think about like something that takes your mind out of this headspace that you were in, and it gradually pulls it out in a way that isn't, harmful for you. Because you're exhausted after a scene that, in an example, like what Aileen said, if it's a scene involving abuse, that is so immensely traumatizing emotionally and mentally, and then you end up like tensing up and feeling hurt in the way that this character is hurting. And how do you bring yourself back to, I'm not that person right now. I'm here in a room in a very specific time and place. It's not real. The story is real, but you in that environment, that's not you. So taking the time to really like let it all out and bring yourself back to a conscious reality of like, this is Stephanie the actor, this is Aileen the actor in a room with this number of chairs, with this many lights above me, to bring yourself to the conscious awareness of where you are in that moment helps, at least for me, bring myself out of a really tough role.
And you mentioned that was a method that you were taught in your conservatory training.
Yeah.
So on the flip side, I want to ask, because you called it a ritual, and it is a ritual just as much as it is a technique, a heady technique that we could, mirror Sọma's terminology there, which I really like. What is more, have any of you gone outside of your training and had to develop your own technique, something that's maybe a little bit more, I love the word ritual too, but maybe something that's a bit more spiritual?
Yeah. So like, for me, therapy has been extremely important in my life overall, just as a person, because we're actors and we tend to be highly empathetic. Like, we are carrying a lot of other people's emotions and our own emotions. And a lot of things I have learned in response to like a dissociative episode or like a depressive episode do really feel similar to things that are practiced within like acting training. Like you said, like taking the time to breathe, and then like counting chairs or identifying things you can like physically, tangibly touch and see and feel or taste. And then also there's a new ritual that I just learned about, which is like called, it's called grief taps. And I think this originates in Kenya. I'm not exactly sure of the tribe, but this is like something that is practiced when, you know, the weight of grief is like pushing down on you, and it's like these deep breaths where you breathe in and then you tap, I don't know if you like take a gentle fist and you like tap your lungs, and you kind of come up and you tap your arms, and it's like these little gentle like hugs, like you're reminding your skin and your body of your physical like carnal like personhood. And I feel like tapping into like our ancestral methods of processing is like very helpful for me to get my feet back on the ground after I've like flown away.
Definitely. I can speak on that in the literal term of like getting your feet on the ground. I am someone, before I perform, like I feel the need to take off my shoes and feel the earth to literally ground me. Mm-hmm. And before a performance, I'm Haitian and Grenadian, so like I have a very strong like upbringing on this value to your ancestors. So I do pray before a performance. Okay. And I do call my grandfather in the room, or like people that I've known that have passed, and sort of ask them to be with me, carry me, protect me, so that when I am present, I don't lose myself too much, but please give me the space and energy that I feel safe enough to commit 100%. And when the performance is usually finished, I am someone, again, who grabs my arms, grabs my face, touch my feet, look at every single person of the room and say, hey, this is no longer so-and-so character's name. This is Leo. This is Aileen. This is Christiana. This is Sọma. And that brings me back to the room. And then I thank the space, because after the performance, the space is no longer Ireland or Canada. It's the room. And that energy feels good to me, and that reminds me about all the work that I've done. And if it started from imagination, because it was my imagination that created the world before I walked in and during the performance, it's my imagination that's going to get me back and understand that I am me. We created this together, and we're gonna do it again tomorrow.
I feel like personally, once I started going to taking training and stuff like that, getting very involved in yoga and connecting body to breath, because I find that myself, I tend to be up here like constantly, like I'm constantly in my own head, and I really struggle to really connect with myself as a whole. So recently, like starting the day with yoga, and then after every performance, especially, I got to work on a project that was just like, it really did change like the way I thought about things and the way I thought about myself, in learning how to be thankful, grateful, and how to trust in myself, to trust that I'm going to be able to come back, to trust that I'm going to do what I need to do. So taking time to like bring different manifestations to myself, like manifesting positivity within myself, regardless of like whatever's going on, like speaking to myself in a very gentle way, and just knowing that like I'm going to be able to push myself without pushing myself too far.
Kristina, I just want to circle back to what you said. You said something about imagination, and I really loved that, and I want to latch onto that and just unpack that more. And ritual too, because we're kind of throwing that word around a lot. With ritual and imagination, how do you view theater as a form of ritual in and of itself? Because if we look back to our ancestors and the people who were doing theaters thousands of years ago, it was a connection to ritual, and spirituality and religion and acting were like hand in hand. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about imagination, because spirituality has a lot to do with the world, different worlds, material world, magical world, different planes. And I want to talk about how we use theater as a form of ritual, but also theater as a form of world making or world building, and how that helps us in society as a mode of healing.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Kristina.
Oh, I mean, I don't want you to forget your thought, but I just wanted to say a quick thing about like the literal embodiment of a person. When you start, because at first we start with the words, and I'm gonna tie this all back to ritual, but we start with the script, we start with this person's dialect. This person's dialect is ingrained in us, right? And as I can't remember her name right now. She did Fires in the Mirror, Anna Devere Smith. She has a great quote that says, if you say this so much times, you will eventually become it, right? So we start with this person's dialect, and then depending on your technique, you start going from neutral to your own you create this physicality. And I believe that in that process, you are actually embodying another spirit that is not your own. It feels, at least how I connected with my technique, it literally feels like transcendence, like transformation, because this person is not me. The vessel is me, but the story, the speech, the physicality, it's not my own. I have to actually embody it. And that for me is very spiritual. When you look at some actual spiritual rituals, when people are becoming other spirits and they know what those spirits do, and they have to embody that spirit. And you have elders that can point at that person and be like, oh, that person is embodying so-and-so spirit. I hope that made sense, but I'm still working through it. It's a lifelong journey. I'm only in my early 20s, and I feel like I'm definitely going to be an older actor or older artist that is going to find the language to connect both of them, performance and ritual. Because right now I feel like the conversation is about those things being connected is still being created in a way. But yes, Aileen.
So two things. The healing thing is something that I've been considering a lot since quarantine started, because I feel like for me, I've realized healing is kind of like an activity that I have to sit down and dedicate time to really get it working and in motion. And when my mind is considering healing, I always find my mind jumps to images of babies and children and very young, innocent beings. And what I love about actors is our inherent need to play, and our willingness and this eagerness to play pretend, because we know that it's play pretend, we go through all the work just to play pretend on stage, and that moment of escape also becomes a moment of looking. It always feels like a reflection when you're on stage doing the show and you're with your character, and I have myself over here, and there's this very trippy looking at yourself in another body, in another set of circumstances. And it feels like when I get to do that, I'm healing myself and whoever my character is.
Sọma, I'm wondering if you can speak to world building as well, because of the way that Dreams in Black Major, which was a production that you were in, which was so great, the way that production rests so heavily on world building. I'm just wondering, can you speak to the importance of world building and world making and the process as well?
Yeah, Dreams in Black Major was such an incredible project to be a part of, because I think, oftentimes productions are focused on the end result and what the audience is going to see, when I think the world building actually happens in that rehearsal room. Every single show I've ever been a part of, the true evolution has always happened when we're rehearsing. And we translated that whole experience, that whole rehearsal period, and everything, every thought, every emotion from that whole process, and was able to share that through the words, through the visuals of the piece on the day of the performance. So I think it even goes beyond just I'm playing this role and you're going to watch me play this character, but embedded into the character, embedded into the storyline is this whole world that you've been creating the whole time. We'll never get to see. It's still there at the end.
Yeah, I don't want to get too blasphemous or anything, but I used to be I was raised in Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, which is super duper strict. And once I kind of started to step out of that religious identity, I started to see how showing up to a place of worship and going through this very specific process physically of bowing and sitting and praying and is very, very similar to a rehearsal process. We show up to a space and we touch our toes and we do a drop down and we breathe and we do all these certain things that literally make you feel aligned and leave your pathways open to be receptive of your higher self and of different spiritual energies. So I do feel in the same way that religion is this ritualistic based thing, we are kind of deciding when people go to worship to create something, you're deciding to show up somewhere and decide that this thing, whether it's your God or the universal life force that you cannot see, you cannot feel, you cannot touch it, it's real though. It's very, very real. And I feel that is literally the whole concept of theater, is deciding we can't see this world, we don't know these people, but they're very real, and I think that is just the power of the human psyche to say there's no evidence, but this is real, period.
So I'm going to shift a little bit away from the spirituality and into more technical questions. So I want to know, when you receive a script, what is your meter for saying yes to a role?
I feel for myself, I really like things that are just well written in truth. If I'm reading it, and even if I see something or playing a character in which I don't really relate to them, or I don't necessarily approve of the things that they're saying and they're doing, does it line up with truth? Is this someone's truth? Is it a truth? Is this a truth that I want to bring into the world? Is this a truth that I want to speak energy into? And so for me, it's just really making sure that saying yes, even if there is a balance of oh, this character is problematic in the way that they think, but is this going to do more good than harm?
Also weighing out how challenging a role is. I personally I love challenge in the practice, and taking yourself to a place and exploring something that you were absolutely not familiar with at all. Because I love doing the research, and I love being curious about this one character. Usually I would say yes to a role if it's something very physically demanding and something I haven't done before, but can still feel myself putting in the work to be able to achieve, as well as the standard, is it serving a community that's not just for me individualistically, or what is it speaking to? Who is it shedding light on? Who is being given a voice in this story?
You spoke a little bit about challenge, Stephanie, and I think you've done one of the most challenging things. So I don't know, do you know what's coming?
Oh, yeah. So I think what you're referring to is that I did shave my head in a very patchy way for a role that is dealing with a character who has alopecia. So that was crazy, and something I've never done before. And I really got the opportunity to really sit with the director and figure out how like his psyche went through all of it, and because he himself like went through that whole process, and in a time that was so like fragile for people in general. When you're like first year of high school, the transition is just the worst, and then to have that stacked on top, and then how it intersects with Chinese culture and thinking in all of those ways. I loved it because it also, you know, challenged myself personally, like Stephanie as the actor, like, can you let go of this long hair that you've had for like 20 years of your life? Can you say, I don't need this for a character to be an actor? You know, it's because inherently our line of work is pretty visual, and it's unfortunate that like how you look plays into a factor of like where you're going to be cast, and to take your personal like feelings of your attachment to anything that is kind of more superficial or vain, in a sense, that we unfortunately as actors have to, you know, play and put into consideration, especially as women and women of color, you know, just the whole situation of that, being able to just say like, forget it, I'm gonna let it go and see where it takes me, is very liberating. But also like the ramp leading up to the day where I not only shaved my head, but shaved it in like really ugly patches, like up the front, like on the sides, was, you know, a personal challenge that I wanted to face and then overcome.
Now, did you guys leave that scene towards the end, or
it was kind of split half and half? Like we did what we could without having to shave my head, loaded in the first 2 days, but then at the end of day 2 it happened, and then after that we had to figure out, okay, so we're missing some hair now in a couple of these shots. How can we mimic, like, and it ended up me taking piles of my dead hair, putting it in ponytails, and like sticking it in my hat to make it look more realistic. So kind of how it was the first couple of days. But yeah, it was, once it happened, it was like, okay, this looks really bad. And you got to sit with it for 48 more hours before you shave the rest of it off. And that was the most like a weight off the shoulders part at the end, because it's like I don't have to see myself in the mirror and be like every day.
Now also Stephanie's being incredibly modest here. She is also the director on Lotus as well. You and Dan, both of you directed that, and I'm so excited to see it. It looks fantastic. And
Thank you.
In that same vein, I want to ask about rehearsal process, because film and theater are so different in that way. And honestly, I feel like my challenge as an artist, because I come from the performance world, so I have more roots in theater in that sense, in terms of a process. But as a writer, I have my training in screenwriting, so I am existing in both worlds, and I'm trying to see how I can steal from each process and combine something new. So I just want to know, like, do you prefer a rehearsal process, or in film, are you just that person who's like, nope, I can't do a rehearsal, I just have to like be in the moment and just cameras here and do the thing? Let me know.
I love character work to begin with. Like, the reason why I became an actor is to discover people and like discover situations that they're in and how they feel. Like, that empathetic curiosity that I have is sort of what drives my practice as an actor, and that totally extends to film. Not every film is going to do that because of budget and time constraints or whatever, but I was fortunate enough to, you know, work with a co-writer and a co-director and some incredible actors who played, you know, the supporting roles in this, to really hash out the life behind mom, dad, and the daughter. So what I love about theater is taking the time to discover and explore and build the world. Much like how I'm friends with Nia, who did Dreams of Black Major, so I got to watch her talk through her ideas before she even took it to the rehearsal room. So that it's so inspiring to learn from those processes and in ways that are devised pieces, and then bring it into film, because at the end of the day, you're telling stories on a different medium. It's still an individual character. It's still this moment in time that you're trying to explain and share with an audience. So why not focus on the character? Why not focus on that one scene for 2 hours? Some people don't like to do that. They just like to go in and out, get their payment and move on. But if you really care about the roles that you're playing, I feel like some of the best actors, and I definitely feel like everyone at this roundtable, would take the time to at least ask their director for notes on how to approach the character, or reach out to whoever else is being cast to say, hey, maybe you want to do a rehearsal. There are steps that I take as an actor to make sure that I nail a character.
Rehearsal is really important, but I don't necessarily need it. I think that character work and preparation is all on the actor. And I know that the director's vision and the writer's vision are very, very, very important. And a lot of times when you're Black, or when you're queer, or when you have a lived experience that aligns with your character, and the director or the writer or the person whose vision is being prioritized doesn't align with that lived experience, I feel like rehearsals become important for me, because I need to know the ways in which I have to navigate their vision. I think I've been in a lot of processes where my understanding of the world and the director's understanding of the world have been like this. And so I kind of just prefer to do screen acting for that reason, because a lot of times I have specific opinions as an actor. And of course we have to be moldable and we have to be open. It's their vision at the end of the day. But I think that has a lot to do, it depends a lot on the project. There's been projects that I worked on where it was literally the safest, most beautiful, gorgeous space, the Ramayana. And that rehearsal process I'm so grateful for, because it really healed my understanding of theater and really healed my understanding of the type of relationship that's possible with an actor and a director and a team and a creative team. So I think it really depends for me on the project and who's involved, because sometimes I really, really don't want to hear anything from the creative team. And then sometimes I'm just please tell me everything that you want me to know and inform me, please. And then other times I'm you can't inform me. So I think it really depends.
I think what I was taught in training is that especially on a film set, it's very rare that you'll get a chunk to rehearse your scene with your partner or with the director. But I feel the attitude that my college training has told me to cultivate is time with yourself and the words that you'll be speaking. There must be time dedicated to that, no matter you get rehearsal chunk or not. But I think for me that's also rehearsal. It's prep work. All the prep work is still rehearsal, even if it's just in your room, you and the script. And we have a duty as actors to always bring something to the table. And I think I believe a lot of people here also are both actors and directors, or creators of some sort, not just acting. And when I've I feel like it's like when considering like the director's mind and the actor's mind, it's like I always like to remember it's always the aim to be reined back rather than have someone push me to where I need to be. Like, let's start at 8 and not be asked to get to like an 8, you know. Yeah, it's like the integrity of the work lies with rehearsal and research, of course. But I think that's all. It's, yeah, I would call that rehearsal, I think.